one of the nurses came in and said, okay, so Quinn had a bit of a rough night. And automatically, like, I felt like my heart was in my throat. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm finally sitting down to film my labor and delivery story with my firstborn, Quinn, who just turned 2 on March 9th. And it's kind of going to lead into a bit of discussion about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And see, I was never diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but I definitely suffered from post-traumatic stress. I just don't know if it got to the point that it needed to be something that was diagnosed. But anyways, so my pregnancy with Quinn went really well. I was super excited. Nothing was out of the ordinary the whole time. I was healthy. I gained a lot of weight, but that was just my body. I was the same with my second Shay. I also gained the same amount of weight. So, but yeah, everything went really smoothly. I enjoyed being pregnant. I had a bit of nausea, but I didn't have any vomiting. And then around, what would it have been? Maybe the 30-week mark, I started to get a lot of anxiety, which I suffer from in general, like apart from being pregnant. Panic attacks and anxiety is like something I've been battling for a long time. But I've been treated for it for quite some time now. It took a while to figure out exactly what I needed, but I seemed to be doing okay up until the 30-week mark, and I think it was because I was just starting to get a little nervous about the labor and delivery part of it and how our lives were going to change afterwards. So anyhow, I ended up having to go off work in January, mid-January, and Quinn's due date was March 27th of 2017. And then I was just doing the usual nesting, I guess, trying to get things ready around the house, which was good for me. I think it made me feel a little bit more at ease, knowing that I was kind of getting everything ready. So, sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the monitor because she's napping right now, but he's moving around a lot, which is not a good sign. You might wake up. But anyways, so, and then I want to say around the end of February, I started to feel a little bit crampy, but I didn't think it was anything to be worried about. And then on March 7th at around 3 in the morning, I had been sleeping on our couch for, oh my gosh, I felt like 3 months, to be honest, but it was probably less than that. I just was so uncomfortable and I had really bad insomnia. Which is, I guess, pretty common. And I was super hot. Like, I just could not get comfortable anywhere. So I was sleeping on the couch. So on March 7th, around 3 a.m., I got up to go to the washroom. And I came back to the couch. And I went to lay down. But then I think I was trying to kick the dog off the couch or something. I think she took my spot while I was in the washroom. And when I got back up, I just felt a huge gush. And my heart immediately started pounding. And I was like, did I just pee my pants? Like, I thought I just went to the washroom. And then, like, I don't know if I was just shocked, but I realized, it took me a second, I realized that my water broke. So I waddled upstairs and got Bryden up, and he was great. He got right out of bed, and I think he was more nervous than I was. And I hopped in the shower, and my contractions hadn't started at that point. Like, I didn't feel any pain at all. And then probably about half an hour, 45 minutes later, they started to kick in. So I was trying to blow dry my hair, like just so ridiculous, because we live about an hour and 20 minutes away from the hospital, so we really needed to get going. But anyways, yeah, so I started blow drying my hair, and then Bryden convinced me like it just wasn't worth it. And we got in the truck, we got everything into the truck, my bag was packed and everything, and then we realized there was no fuel in the truck, which is like classic. And around here there's nothing open at 3 in the morning, like there's not a gas station that would be open, but luckily we have fuel on the farm, so we filled up the truck and we got going. And Bryden was flying, like I was timing my contractions at that point, and they were regular, and I mean, I thought they were painful, but they were nothing compared to with Shay, which will be something I talk about in another vlog. But we got to the hospital and they checked me, and I was only like, I want to say 3 or 4 centimeters dilated, and the contractions started to pick up once I got into my room and everything. So I ended up getting an epidural probably around 10:30 in the morning. Because I was in so much pain. And then I basically obviously couldn't move at that point. And, yeah, so my family came, everyone was waiting, Bryden's family was there. It's kind of something that we didn't really want, but everything happened so fast that they just all ended up showing up, which was fine, because when you hear what happens after this, like, it just was nice to have everyone there. So I was in labor, oh my gosh, it was a while, and they were monitoring everything. Quinn was doing okay. At this point we didn't know if it was a girl or a boy. And then I started to feel a bit more pain, but it wasn't anything like horrible. I was completely blocked in the beginning, like I felt nothing. And they kept checking me, and I want to say around 1 in the morning, they said I was 10 centimeters, and they were going to let me rest for an hour. Uh-oh. Shay's awake. We'll see. He might go back to sleep. He's usually pretty quiet. So they wanted me to rest for an hour, which I had literally been laying there since, I don't know, 10 in the morning, and this was 1 in the morning at this point, on the 8th of March of 2017. So, and all I could eat was popsicles. This is the thing, like I was getting to the point where I was starving because I wasn't in pain, like I had an appetite. So 2 a.m. came and they said, okay, you can start to push. So, and I don't know, like with an epidural, you don't feel anything. So it's hard to know, especially with your first, it's hard to know, are you doing things properly? Are you making any progress? So I was pushing and I was taking a break, and baby was coming down, but they very slowly realized that baby was stuck, like just kind of stuck under my pelvic bone. And my contractions started to slow down, which I learned after the fact that can be kind of a common thing when you have an epidural, like things kind of slow right down. So they gave me oxytocin to get my contractions going again. And at this point, I had completely lost track of time. Both of our families had gone out to the waiting room, obviously, because I was in the midst of pushing. And oh my gosh, you guys, it's so hard to remember back to all this. It's like, I think I was like delirious. I don't even think I remembered at this point why I was in the hospital. And I was freezing cold and shaking. And anyways, so they gave me the oxytocin to get the contractions going again. But then they were noticing that baby was kind of going into distress a little bit. So they'd have to back the oxytocin off. And I was just desperate, like, to get things going. Like, I just wanted to meet my baby. And Bryden was great. He was right there the whole time. And so I think this went on for until the morning. Like, it was forever. And then I had so many shift changes that I went through. I think I saw 3 different OBs in the time that I was there, or 2 different OBs and 3 different nurses. And then the OB that had seen me was gone in to do a C-section. And like, meanwhile, you guys, I am hearing in the rooms on either side of me, people come in, you can hear through the walls screaming, and then you can hear like relief, like the baby's born. And I am still laying there. And I was just getting so frustrated, but I was trying to stay like in the moment and level-headed and not get like angry. Because no one was giving me answers. That was the thing. It was like so up in the air what was going to happen. So eventually I had a resident come in and say, listen, baby's not coming out on their own. So we have to make a decision here. We have to, like, it's up to you. We can try to help you along with forceps. But if that does not work and baby's in distress still from the oxytocin and the forceps, we're going to have to move straight to a C-section, which I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I wasn't against a C-section, but at that point I was like, I have come this far and now you're telling me I have to give up basically and have a C-section. It was just so frustrating. And I was so tired. And I know, like, I was laying down the whole time. Like, I'm not moving. How could I be tired? I was pushing for 11 hours. In the end, like in total, it was 11 hours of pushing. So anyways, I said, listen, I'm not against a C-section. Obviously, if that has to happen, that has to happen. Whatever is going to be safest for me and the baby. But I would like to try forceps first. So I wanted them to tell me, like, am I going to feel anything? Am I going to be in pain? Because it's scary. So they said, no, like, I will be completely numb because they have to make sure I'm prepped in case they need to do an emergency C-section. So that meant that I had to go to the OR as well. So they got me ready to go to the OR. It seemed like 2 hours later. Like, I felt like I was waiting forever to go to the OR. And I was, at this point, I was fevered. So I had developed an infection because my water had been broken since 3 a.m. on the 7th. It was just way too long, and they kept leaving me, and I know they had emergencies going on that night. It was so hectic in there, but I just felt like I got put on the back burner. So, yeah, so they wheeled me to the OR, and I could feel contractions at this point. It was so strange. Like, I felt like all this pain in my upper abdomen, and then they got me onto the bed in the operating room, and they realized that my epidural pump battery had run out, which explained why I was in so much pain. So they got someone to come and replace the battery, and then it took them some time to realize that they forgot to turn it back on. So I was like completely losing all the medication that was numbing me, basically. And at this point, the forceps were in place. Like, I was in so, oh my gosh, you guys, I was in so much pain with the forceps. And the OB said, listen, we're getting the anesthesiologist in here to give you a quick bolus of whatever they give you. I don't know. I can't remember anything. So that you can, I think it was lidocaine. I could be wrong. So that you can start to feel numb a little bit more quickly. But she's like, it might honestly help if you start pushing. Like, the forceps are there. It might feel like a bit of relief. So I said, you know what? I can't just sit here. Let's just, I want to push. I'll push. So I started pushing, and the forceps came out, and baby came out. And she weighed 5 pounds, 10 ounces. So at this point, it was 1:05 p.m. on March 9th. And they rushed her away. Bryden went with her, obviously. I didn't want her to be alone because she was struggling to breathe a little bit. And I didn't know what was going on at this point. I lost quite a bit of blood, I guess. And they had to get me all stitched up, and it was a mess. Sorry, TMI. And then they brought Quinn, so it was a girl, obviously, and we had picked her name was going to be Quinn and middle name Beatrice after Bryden's aunt that had passed away. So they brought her in, and I couldn't even hold her. I was just freezing cold. I was shaking, and I was laying down on this skinny little operating table. I did not feel comfortable trying to hold her on my chest. So Bryden held her with me for a couple seconds, and then they had to take her away to the NICU because she needed oxygen. And then I was so swollen from all the oxytocin. It was crazy. So once I got cleaned up, they brought me back to my room and started to show me how to express my breast milk, so colostrum, obviously, in the beginning, because they wanted to get that for Quinn right away. And then I don't even know how long I had to wait, but eventually I got into my room in the mother-baby unit, and then I had to get hooked up to, I think, like 3 or 4 different types of antibiotics because I was quite sick. And I had lots of pain still in my upper abdomen, which I thought was weird. And I know, like, it's pretty normal. Obviously, you have to have contractions afterwards for your uterus to shrink back down or start shrinking back down to its normal size. We went to see Quinn, and she was in a little incubator, and she had like an IV in her hand. So she had an infection as well. And a fever when she was born. So we both had fevers. We were just both really not well. And she was so tiny, you guys. And I wanted to hold her so badly, and I couldn't. And I was so uncomfortable from being so swollen. Anyways, it's so hard to remember all of this. Like, it just brings back really... They're great memories. I know they're great memories. It was like whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but it was a tough time, and no one can prepare you for it. And I know there's so many families that go through so much worse than what we went through, but when you're going through it, it feels like the end of the world. So we stayed with her as long as we could, and they said I could try and breastfeed her, but I had to wait until she kind of had stabilized a bit more. She was okay. Nothing was really like going crazy, but they wanted to make sure she was good with her antibiotics and oxygen and everything. And then eventually she got moved into the like less critical care unit in the neonatal intensive care unit, where we could hold her, and we basically got to do all the taking care of her. In the other unit, it was basically the nurses that did everything. And we were in the NICU for a total of 3 weeks, I think, to the day, which does not seem like that long, but it was torture. And in the meantime, we had a barn being built here at home, so Bryden couldn't be there every day, all day. So I was basically by myself all day. From like 7 a.m. I would go from the accommodations that they have right there at the hospital site, the Ronald McDonald House. I would go over and I would spend the whole day with her, and I was trying to pump every 2 hours because I really wanted to make sure she was getting breast milk at that point. I know there's nothing against formula, but I just wanted to make sure in the beginning for sure that she had my colostrum. And I wanted to at least get my milk supply established so that if she was able to breastfeed, I had milk for her. And then I ended up, I don't want to drag this out for too long, but so we stayed in a hotel at first for a few days until they had room in Ronald McDonald House right at the hospital site. And I was in excruciating pain. Like, this is like, it was worse, you guys, than the labor and delivery. And it wasn't contractions. Like, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know if I had gas trapped in my abdomen, or I had no idea, but it was so bad that it was making me sick. And it would wake me up in the middle of the night, and I would just be writhing in pain. I couldn't, and like, I was not even really sleeping straight through. Obviously, I had to get up every 2 to 3 hours to pump. And this is all after I had been discharged from the mother-baby unit and once all the IV antibiotics had been completed. So I ended up in the ER because I was I could not even get out of bed to go to the NICU for a couple of days in the very beginning because I was so sick. I had to sit in a wheelchair to get through the hospital. I mean, aside from the fact that I had just had a baby and had 3rd-degree tear and all of that, and I was super swollen from the oxytocin, like my stomach was killing me. So Bryden ended up taking me down to Emerge, and they hooked me up to an IV there, and they did an ultrasound to see if maybe I had gallstones, because the pain was radiating kind of like from under my ribs all the way through to my back, and it seemed to be worse in the evening, but it would also kind of like in the evening to like overnight, and then in the morning it would happen, but it wasn't as bad. But they didn't see any gallstones, so they were kind of like at a loss. They didn't really know what was going on, but it just sounded so typical of gallstones. So I said, is it possible that I'm having gallbladder spasms? And they said, yeah, it could be, like it's a hollow muscle or something like that. I can't remember exactly what they called it. So it could be spasming. So they had given me, I want to say it was Maalox, thinking maybe I had heartburn or indigestion, but I knew it wasn't that. I just knew it was way too painful for it to be something like that. And the Maalox had lidocaine in it to try and like numb my esophagus, but like I knew that wasn't going to do anything. And then eventually they put me on a Buscopan drip, which I believe Buscopan is an antispasmodic drug. And within minutes, I felt like $1,000,000, relatively speaking. Like I did not have any pain anymore. And so they said, okay, we're going to write you a prescription for Buscopan. And you can go get it filled. They're just tablets. And it's really not the best thing to take while you're breastfeeding. I don't think it is horrible, but like if you can avoid it, avoid it. Which I found out from the lactation consultant. But anyways, Buscopan was on back order. Like you could not get it at any pharmacy in the surrounding area. So Bryden ended up, which like was about to put me into, like, I didn't even know. I wanted to crawl into a hole. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And then all this stuff started with Quinn's genetics. They had to do a chest x-ray just to make sure her lungs were clear. I'm sorry if I'm not looking at the camera, you guys. It's just, I'm trying to remember everything, and for some reason it's like looking out the window makes it a little bit more peaceful for me. And I don't know why, it's just, it's helping me. And I don't want to cry, so... Anyways, when they did the chest x-ray, they noticed she had some kind of spinal anomalies, which is something that's genetic on my husband's side. They have a history of scoliosis. And then it brought up some other issues. They had to check her heart. She had a hole in her heart, which I guess all babies are born with a hole, but once they're breathing on their own and the pressure changes, the hole is supposed to close up on its own. Well, Quinn's was taking some time. She had a murmur, I believe, and her blood pressure wasn't where it should be, so they were keeping an eye on that. Oh my gosh, there's so much. Like, I can't, we were just so overwhelmed. We ended up being seen by genetics, and they were looking at her hands. I don't know, they must have clued into some traits of hers that made them look into other specifics. So on your hand, the palm of your hand, most people will have 2 separate lines, and some people, and it's a genetic trait, will have, it's called a simian crease. So instead of there being 2 separate lines, there's one line that goes straight across. And it can be seen in just various types of syndromes and just in general as a genetic trait that gets inherited from your family. So Quinn had that, and what else? Oh, they had to look into her mouth, I believe. They thought maybe she had a submucous cleft palate, which is not, like, you can't tell by looking at her, like, her face is completely intact, like there's no opening or anything from her nose to her mouth, but on the roof of her mouth they felt a notch. So with I don't know if I'm going to get this entirely correct, but with a submucosal cleft palate, the roof of the mouth is closed over, but the bone underneath, I believe, is not completely developed. So when they spit up or throw up, the same amount that comes from their mouth also comes through their nose. But that's like, that can happen that happens to me, or it has happened to me when I've thrown up. So I don't know. In general, you guys, we were feeling so overwhelmed. Bryden was the most supportive guy. But he was stressed. I could tell he was stressed because no one was giving us clear-cut answers. We saw orthopedic surgery. We saw cardiac specialist for her heart. We saw genetics. And then because I was on antibiotics and in pain from the gallbladder spasms, or what they suspected were gallbladder spasms, without a proper medication because Buscopan was on back order, I also developed thrush. So when I was trying to pump, I was feeling like I had shards of glass coming out of my nipples. And they were all cracked, and this is so gross, you guys. TMI again. I don't know how else to tell you this without it sounding like too much, but it was just horrible. And I thought it was normal. Like, I had nothing to compare it to. I just could not believe that this is what every mom, or most moms, went through when they were breastfeeding. I was like, I thought it was supposed to be uncomfortable at first, but I didn't realize it felt like I had knives coming out of me, and I would just cringe every 2 to 3 hours when I was pumping. Oh my gosh, it was the worst. And like, I would bleed a little bit, and then finally I said, I need to see a lactation consultant because something's not right. There's just no way that this is normal. If it was, I was gonna have to quit pumping. Like, I just could not continue with it, with everything else that was going on, especially, and I was exhausted. Hi, little birdie. Aww. So the lactation consultant came into our room in the NICU where Quinn was, and she said, you have thrush and you need to get that treated because it's not going to go away on its own. And in general, it's not easy to get rid of it, especially when it gets to the point where it's as bad as it was with me. So they recommended a solution. I had to go to the pharmacy to get this solution of, I think it's called Gentian Blue or Gentian Violet. And you basically use a giant cotton swab and coat your nipple in this solution, which it's basically the color of my shirt. And then if baby's breastfeeding, the baby's mouth will turn purple, but I mean, least of your problems. It's better than the baby getting thrush in their mouth, which is what I wanted to avoid. So at that point I said, okay, I'm definitely not going to even try to start breastfeeding her. I want to wait until this clears up because I don't want to have to deal with that on top of everything else. And then, so that took a while, and then I ended up developing mastitis. So I got sent home for a full weekend. I had to completely rest, sleep, pump, eat, do nothing, basically. I had to get caught up on sleep. I was so run down. I had like the typical mastitis symptoms, like flu-like symptoms, like aches, fever, chills. Yeah, so I came home, and it was so hard to leave her because we live like an hour, 20 minutes away. It was so hard to leave her, but Bryden would go after work, and the nurses were there to care for her in the NICU. And they would have notified us of anything, if anything happened, because she was still struggling. I think at that point she had like reflux. She was doing a lot of spitting up, and she was not eating, you guys. It was such a struggle. That ended up being one of the reasons why we were there for so long, was she would not eat. We couldn't get her to take a bottle, so she had a feeding tube in. And they suspected it might have had something to do with her palate, or possibly a tongue tie. So it's like trying to figure everything out was just such a process. So I started to feel better after having a few days of rest, and I went back to be with Quinn in the hospital. And then one morning, Bryden dropped me off from the Ronald McDonald house, because he would stay there with me at night, and then he'd come back to the farm during the day, just so that I wasn't alone. He dropped me off, and I remember going up and being so excited. Every morning I was so excited to walk in there and see her. She was so cute and so little, and so helpless. But I walked in and she was sleeping, and one of the nurses came in and said, okay, so Quinn had a bit of a rough night. And automatically, like, I felt like my heart was in my throat. I said, what do you mean she had a rough night?